Some men don't need enemies. They sabotage their own lives, not with fists or fights, but with the things they casually say. One line at a time, they chip away at their own foundation. Phrases that sound tough, confident, maybe even real. But if you peel back the swagger, all that's left is fear dressed in laziness. You've heard these lines before, probably from someone close to you, maybe even from yourself. The Stoics had a saying, "Speech is the mirror of the mind." And if your words are full of excuses, blame, or empty posturing, then your life probably follows the same script. Quietly, steadily. Today, we're not here to sugarcoat anything. We're calling out 6 things men say when they've stopped growing, when their ego starts to rot, and their discipline quietly dies. These aren't harmless phrases. They're warning signs. And more importantly, we'll show you what a Stoic man would say instead. Because what you say, especially when no one's watching, isn't just noise. It's a signal. So if you've ever opened your mouth and immediately regretted the weakness that came out, stick around. This one might sting, but in the best way. If that sounds good to you, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below that says, "I'd rather stay quiet than sound like a fool." Now let's get into it, before your words do more damage than your enemies ever could. 1. That's just how I am. It sounds solid, right? Like a man who knows himself. But here's the truth. That's just how I am is one of the most dangerous things a man can say. Because it's not a declaration of strength. It's a quiet form of surrender. A white flag wrapped in tough talk. This phrase is often used by men who confuse being rigid with being strong. They stand still and call it integrity. But really, they've stopped moving, stopped learning, stopped becoming. I knew a man like that once. Carl. Retired Navy. Always sharply dressed, always in control of the room. But behind closed doors, Carl was stuck, emotionally locked up. Whenever his wife asked for connection, something deeper than small talk, Carl would shrug her off. "I'm not built like that," he'd say. When his son tried to bring up old wounds, Carl would grunt. "That's not how I do things." He wasn't cruel, he was just frozen. And over time, everything around him started to fade. Not because of fights or betrayal, but because nothing ever changed. His marriage eroded. His son grew distant. His life became a slow, quiet collapse. Eventually, his wife left. No dramatic exit, no final argument. She just stopped waiting for him to change. That's what makes this phrase so corrosive. It sounds like conviction, but it's just fear of growth dressed up as confidence. The Stoics didn't believe in locking yourself into an identity. They believed in refining it. Seneca said, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." That quote hits harder the older you get, because it means that the minute you stop listening, you start dying. See, men often confuse age with wisdom, but one doesn't guarantee the other. A man who keeps repeating the same stories, the same excuses, the same behavior, becomes less of a man and more of a statue. Solid, sure, but forgotten. A Stoic doesn't cling to the idea of "this is who I am." He asks, "What do I need to become?" Not because the world demands it, but because his soul does. The man who says, "That's just how I am," has already started to decay. His thoughts narrow. His words grow shallow. His world shrinks down to habits, defense mechanisms, and pride. And eventually he becomes a ghost of who he could have been. A Stoic doesn't use identity as a shield. He uses honesty like a blade. He listens. He adapts. He sharpens himself daily, not because he's weak, but because he refuses to stay dull. If you've ever caught yourself saying, "That's just how I am," stop. Ask instead, what am I avoiding by staying the same? 2. Real men don't talk about feelings. Let's tear this one apart. There's a toxic badge that gets passed down between generations, a lie dressed as legacy. Real men don't talk about their feelings. You hear it at barbershops, locker rooms, backyard barbecues. It sounds noble, masculine, stoic even. But it's not stoicism, it's fear. The American Psychological Association has research that shows men who bottle up emotions are far more likely to suffer from depression, heart disease, and early death. Read that again. Early death. All because they refuse to talk about what's going on inside. But what's wild is how this lie keeps getting handed down like a family heirloom, worn with pride. I keep things to myself. I don't do emotions. That stuff's for women. What they're really saying is, I'm afraid of the war inside me. See, this isn't about masculinity. This is about avoidance, emotional cowardice, pulling the blinds down and hoping the storm passes while letting pain rot you from the inside out. And here's the twist. People think Stoicism is about emotional suppression, but that's not it at all. The Stoics taught clarity, not avoidance. Marcus Aurelius wrote privately about his pain, his doubts, his struggles. He didn't perform his emotions, but he didn't deny them either. He examined them. He faced them head on so they wouldn't own him. True Stoicism isn't about burying your feelings. It's about recognizing them, naming them, choosing your response not based on impulse, but from a place of stillness. Here's the reality. Most men who refuse to talk about their emotions are the ones most controlled by them. Anger that shows up in traffic. Resentment that poisons relationships. Numbness that masquerades as strength. When you're too scared to admit what you're feeling, the people around you pay the price. And so do you. You don't need to break down in front of strangers, but you do need to stop pretending your emotions don't exist. Because a man who hides from his inner life eventually gets swallowed by it. Real strength. It's not just lifting weights or earning status. It's sitting quietly with your discomfort, facing the truth, and speaking not to unload, but to understand. So, if you've ever said real men don't talk about feelings, it might be time to ask, who taught you that? And more importantly, what has it cost you? 3, it's not my fault. You hear this phrase from grown men like it's some kind of magic spell that erases all responsibility. It's not my fault. And at first it sounds reasonable, defensible. But let's be clear, it's one of the fastest ways to reveal a man's weakness. Because when a man repeats this line enough, he's not just trying to protect himself from blame, he's confessing something deeper, that he's surrendered all agency. This is the language of someone who's convinced that life just happens to him, that he's always the victim, never the cause, never the solution. And if you live in that mindset long enough, your entire existence begins to hollow out. Stoic thinkers saw this attitude as a kind of moral disease. Epictetus once said, "It is not events that disturb us, but our opinions about them." Meaning what happens to you is rarely the real problem, it's how you process it. And no thought is more corrosive than the idea that it's always someone else's responsibility. Men who constantly blame the economy, their boss, their wife, their upbringing, their enemies, the weather, the traffic, what they're really doing is handing over their power. Every single time they say, "It's not my fault," they're giving the steering wheel of their life to someone else. Even worse, they silence the one voice that could change everything their own. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." That's not a quote you print on a coffee mug. That's a commandment for how to live like a man. See, blame is easy. It's a reflex for people who never learn to reflect. But responsibility, that's rare. That requires strength. That asks you to stop waiting for apologies, to stop hoping for different circumstances, and instead, ask yourself one painful question: what can I control? And the answer is always the same: your reaction, your direction, your discipline. Especially for older men, men who've walked through decades of hardship, it's easy to carry your wounds like a permission slip. To tell yourself, "I've been through enough, I've earned the right to sit this out." But that's not wisdom. That's fear dressed up in nostalgia. The Stoics never denied the pain of life, but they refused to let it define their next move. Seneca said, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, or a man perfected without trials." So yeah, life will cut you open, people will disappoint you, circumstances will break your heart. But the second you lean on, "It's not my fault," you start losing the one thing that could save you, your willingness to rise anyway. Don't say, "It's not my fault." Say, "It's now my responsibility." Because that shift right there, that subtle flip of ownership, is the line between a man who stays bitter and a man who starts getting better. 4, I deserve better. This one's trickier because at first it sounds like self-respect. I deserve better. But dig a little deeper and you'll often find something else hiding underneath entitlement. Quiet arrogance. A man who's focused on what he wants instead of what he's earned. The ones who say this the loudest are rarely the ones doing the hard, quiet work behind the scenes. They're waiting for life to deliver something more: respect, more love, more money, without ever asking if they've truly earned it. Here's the Stoic truth: life doesn't owe you anything. Marcus Aurelius put it bluntly: Don't waste time wondering what a good man should be. Be one. See, entitlement is a clever trap. It makes you think you're being noble standing up for yourself when really you're just waiting for the world to validate you. But Stoicism flips the script. It says, stop tallying up what you think you're owed. Start building what you admire. The man who walks around saying, I deserve better, is usually the same man who's doing less than he thinks and expecting more than he's earned. He's mistaking dissatisfaction for growth, but those aren't the same thing. Dissatisfaction without effort leads to resentment. Growth requires discomfort, discipline, patience. The Stoic doesn't say, I want what's mine. He says, I will become what I admire no matter what I get in return. And that mindset, that humility, that craftsmanship, it changes everything. I've seen this play out in men reaching the later chapters of life. Maybe their career didn't pan out the way they hoped. Maybe their marriage hit a wall. Maybe their kids drifted away. And instead of reflecting, they default to that phrase, I deserve better. But here's the test: if you spend more time announcing your value than building it, something's already off. Seneca said it well. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And one of the biggest wastes, expecting praise for work never done. So next time you're tempted to say, I deserve better, pause. Ask, am I still sharpening? Because real self-worth isn't about what you think you should get. It's about whether you're still willing to grow quietly, consistently, even when no one's clapping. 5. That's not my job. You hear this one all the time. That's not my job. It's usually said with a straight face, like it's mature, like it's a boundary. But what it really signals is a quiet kind of retreat. Men who say this have stopped leading but still want to be seen as dependable. They've shrunk their effort down to the bare minimum. They confuse staying in their lane with having integrity. But really, they're hiding behind job descriptions because they've lost their sense of purpose. I once knew a man named Ryan, old machinist from Pittsburgh, 30 years on the factory line, never missed a shift, showed up like clockwork. But at home, different story. Dishes, not his job. Helping his son with college decisions, not his job. Emotional conversations with his wife, definitely not his job. He thought providing was enough. He thought doing the bare minimum in all the right places made him a good man. But his wife didn't leave because he failed. She left because he never showed up where it mattered most. That's what happens when not my job becomes your motto. You trade usefulness for comfort. You stop asking what needs to be done and only ask what's required of me. And that's not leadership. That's slow surrender. The Stoics didn't wake up and ask, what's my role today? They asked, how can I show up fully as a man? Marcus Aurelius asked, what is your vocation to be a good man? Not a man who hides behind checklists, but a man who sees a gap and steps into it. Because real Stoic strength, it's doing what needs to be done even when no one notices, even when no one thanks you, even when it feels thankless, pointless, invisible. When you constantly say, that's not my job, what you're really saying is, I don't want to be bothered with more responsibility. That's not protection, that's neglect. A Stoic man doesn't wait for someone else to carry the weight. He picks it up without being asked. Because that's what strength looks like when it's quiet. And here's the consequence. The more you outsource your effort, the more people start working around you, not with you. They stop leaning on you. They stop expecting more. And eventually, they stop trusting your presence. So next time that phrase rises up, that's not my job, stop. Ask instead, what kind of man would step up right now? Be that man. 6. It is what it is. This one slides out of the mouth almost unnoticed. 5 little words. Casual, shrugged, harmless. It is what it is. Sounds stoic, doesn't it? But it isn't. Not even close. This phrase doesn't reflect acceptance. It reflects surrender. Not the noble kind, the exhausted, checked out kind. It's the verbal equivalent of turning off the lights and pretending no one's home. It signals one thing above all: you've given up trying. Behavioral science calls this learned helplessness. It's what happens when someone stops believing they have the power to change anything. And it is what it is becomes the anthem of that resignation. The tragedy is that this phrase gets confused with wisdom. It gets tossed around like it came from a monk on a mountain. But when most men say it, they're not channeling calm, they're numbing out. They've stopped fighting, stopped caring, stopped choosing. Now don't get me wrong, the Stoics did teach us to accept the things we can't control, but that's only half the story. Marcus Aurelius said you have power over your mind, not outside events. That wasn't a lullaby to fall asleep with. It was a wake-up call. He didn't say, "You don't control the world, so do nothing." He said, "Start with your mind. There's work to do." Stoicism teaches you to observe what is, then act with precision. It is what it is skips that second part. It stops at the observation. It forgets the response. It encourages stagnation disguised as serenity. You hear this phrase most from men who've been worn down, maybe by disappointments, maybe by betrayal, maybe just by time. But over the years, they started to believe that effort was pointless. So they watched their lives unfold like strangers on the sidelines. And here's where it gets scary. That mindset doesn't just stay in one area. It spreads into relationships, into ambition, into health, into family. You stop trying to fix the problem. Then you stop caring that it exists. And then, worst of all, you stop noticing. One day you look around and realize you're not respected, not feared, not even disliked. You're just unnoticed. That's the quiet fate of men who once had power but gave it away one shrug at a time. There's a difference between composure and capitulation. Composure says, "I see reality and I'll respond within my power." Capitulation says, "I see reality and I give up." The Stoic man doesn't mutter "it is what it is" and check out. He doesn't numb himself under the banner of peace. He accepts what's unchangeable and immediately begins working on what is. So next time those words rise up when something falls apart or falls short, pause. Ask yourself, is this real Stoic acceptance? Or am I just too tired to care? Because if you keep choosing apathy, the world will stop choosing you. And when you disappear into passivity, you don't just lose battles, you lose yourself. The final truth, what will you say? Instead, now that we've gone through all 6 phrases, it's time for one final question. What will you say instead? Because every man leaves a trail. Some leave footprints, some leave phrases, and most of the world won't judge you by your goals, your past, or even your failures. They'll judge you by the little things that slip out when you're not paying attention. Your go-to responses, your default defenses, your throwaway lines. And these 6, they aren't just weak, they sound like weakness. Repeated long enough, they don't just describe you, they become you. But here's the twist. That identity isn't final, not unless you keep running from it. Weakness isn't the real enemy. Denial is. Marcus Aurelius said the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. So if your language is full of excuses, blame laziness, and quiet surrender, that becomes the tone of your life. People feel it. You feel it. Your relationships suffer because of it. Your ambitions stall because of it. But that can change, right now. Because your words don't have to be perfect. They just have to be precise. You don't have to speak like a guru. You just have to stop speaking like a coward. A Stoic man doesn't talk to impress. He speaks to reveal clarity. He doesn't use words to dominate. He uses them to align himself with truth. And when he chooses silence, that silence has weight. So if this video hit a nerve, don't run from it. That nerve, that sting, that's where your growth begins. Let go of the empty phrases. Pick up something heavier, like accountability, like discipline, like honesty. Say less, mean more. So before you close this video, do one thing: leave a comment that says, "I choose strength over sound." Because foolish men fill the air with noise. But the wise, they speak, and the world leans in.